all, the European definition of the word liberal is different than the American definition. And the guys who invented neoliberalism were, with the exception of Milton Friedman, all Europeans. And so in Europe, when you say liberal, what you're really talking about would in the United States be described as libertarian or conservative economics or Reaganomics or trickle-down economics. And they wanted this to be the new and improved version of that, thus neoliberalism. But you're absolutely right. It was the Reagan Revolution that imposed neoliberalism on the United States. But Bill Clinton was, just fine with that. In fact, he doubled down on it by signing NAFTA and declaring the end of the era of big government and the end of welfare as we know it. And so we've had 40 years of neoliberalism brought to us by both Democrats and Republicans. And now for the first time in those 40 years, we've got a president, Joe Biden, who's actually pushing back on neoliberalism, pushing back against it, which is really a good thing.
I disagree. So how would you overcome my skepticism that unleashing market forces to raise living standards and lower the price of goods and everything? You're saying that's actually been a bad thing, and we need more government management of the economy. Is that what you mean by liberalism? Because the word neoliberalism gets used by a lot of people on the left in like a boogeyman context to refer to absolutely everything they don't like. I think even you would agree that it's a very broad painting being assembled by that word. So what do you mean by it, and what am I missing for why it's been so disastrous?
Well, first of all, neoliberalism doesn't unleash market forces. Market forces are like football, right? It's a game that people play with money. And if you play that game with decent rules, just like the NFL does with football, then the game works for everybody. And that's what we had before neoliberalism. That was basically Keynesian economics. We went from having fewer than 10% of Americans in the middle class in 1930 to 65% of Americans in the middle class in 1980 when Reagan came into office. It's now down to 45% because the, quote, government interference that actually produces a middle class. A middle class is not the normal state of capitalism. Read Dickens, that's the normal state of capitalism. And that was America in the census of 1900. The average American income in today's dollars, family income is $4,300. 95% of Americans were poor, dirt poor in 1900. And so what neoliberalism has done with so-called free trade, which is basically let corporations go anywhere in the world for the cheapest labor possible, by radically cutting taxes on the morbidly rich, which allows them to accumulate massive amounts of wealth that they principally invest in instruments that do not churn, that do not perpetuate the economy, that do not stimulate the economy. What we've seen is a collapse of the middle. Oh, and the neoliberal battle belief that labor unions are an inappropriate interference in the so-called free market, when in fact all they do is balance somewhat the power relationship between employers and employed. These neoliberal principles have gutted the American middle class, and frankly, Biden and many progressive Democrats in particular are calling for an end to it. I think it's a good thing.
Don't give President Trump any credit. He was the one who got rid of NAFTA. He started a trade war with China, put tariffs on all this stuff. He really jump-started a return of manufacturing. To me, he really was the first one to take an axe to the sort of handshake agreement between both parties that enforced this neoliberal order since 1980, like you said. Well, how come he doesn't get any credit in this story?
Well, actually, in my book, he does. And I think that's an important point. I mean, I wouldn't say he was the first to take an axe to it. Bernie Sanders has been singing this song since 1980.
Yes.
Along with a lot of Democrats. Sherrod Brown, for example, has been in the Senate for a long, long time, and he's been arguing against trade deals and things like that. But Donald Trump, this is one of the reasons why he became president in 2016, is he was the first Republican or Democrat since the Reagan Revolution to come out and openly challenge neoliberalism. Now, a lot of what he was saying were just, flat out lies. He said he was going to raise taxes on the rich so that all his friends would hate him. Instead, he gave them a $2 trillion, gift. He said he was going to empower the labor unions, and instead he had, his Department of Labor further gutted union rights. And a lot of the stuff that he said when he challenged neoliberalism just turned out to be BS. And the tariffs that he did were done by executive action rather than by Congress, so they were largely symbolic and you know, most businesses in China certainly realized that they were largely meaningless, but they sold well. And I think that that's, as you point out, that's proof that Americans, even Republicans, are sick and tired of neoliberalism. And you know, the big challenge that Joe Biden has right now, as he calls it out, is that there's still a bunch of Democrats that are promoting neoliberalism. Joe Manchin inserted a provision into both the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, requiring every penny that the government spends on those two pieces of legislation to go through the hands of a for-profit corporation, which is pure neoliberalism. And that was brought to you by a Democrat. So, you know, there's a struggle within the Democratic Party around this right now, as there is in the Republican Party.